And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. George Bremer and Ryan Hickey here with you. George, I don't know about yourself. I am very, very excited for this podcast. So I'm always excited for our podcast, but especially today, because today we are venturing into an area that I hope, fingers crossed, to never actually see in the light of day, and that is the courtroom. If I'm there, that's for the most part not good because I'm nowhere near smart enough to be a lawyer, which means I did something bad, which fingers crossed George will never be there. But we are going to go to court today to make our case as to why the Colts should trade for Lamar Jackson, why the Colts should not trade for Lamar Jackson. You are in the camp that is for the trade. I am in the camp against the trade. I don't know if that's who's the plaintiff, who the defendant is here. I guess it depends on which side that you're on here, but we have dressed for success here when it comes to looking at the judge and looking at the jury, make our case. So me and George are both going to pretend to be lawyers for the day on this pod and make our cases as why the Colts should or should not trade in Lamar. But also we got a lot to discuss here as well because we have both Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard commenting on Lamar Jackson. Some interesting comments from both. We'll get into that as well. But George, I want to just quickly here throw a curveball by you because it is the owners' meetings in Phoenix. That is why Chris Ballard and why Jim Irsay and Shane Steichen are talking this week. I don't know. Did you get a chance to look at the head coach's photo from Wednesday or from Monday?
I did not see it this year. I usually see it one of the first things every year.
So obviously Shane Steichen is very new, so none of us really know much about him. But I will say I was surprised in the photo. A lot of coaches are casual, polos, maybe a button down that's, unbuttoned and, the sleeves rolled up. So it's, again, you're in Phoenix in March. It's warm. It's casual, not too fancy. Shane Steichen was one of the 3 or 4 coaches with a blazer on. I don't know about yourself. That surprised me. Again, not knowing much about him, I figured he would be the more casual guy, playing to chill. He was buttoned up. He was looking good.
Yeah, I know. From what I know of him so far, is the thing you hear more than anything else is all ball. He's just constantly locked into football. So that's interesting. I don't know. Maybe that's the new guy in him, coming out. So go and dress to impress. Most of those guys are dressed for the golf course because that's where they're heading. Like they're either heading there right after that photo or they just came off the course to take it. So, it tells me one of two things. He's either not a golfer or he, possibly got pranked into this. I don't know. Like you're talking about only 3 or 4 of them. Maybe the rookie head coaches lost a bet here or something, but no, I mean, good for him. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what his sideline attire is. I think that's one of the things you never know with the head coach when it comes out. I don't think he's going to wear a suit, but it would be interesting to see.
God.
But is he a visor guy? Is he a full baseball cap guy? Will there be no hat? These are important questions that we won't have an answer to until the preseason starts in August.
This is going to make me sound really pathetic, but I just can't hide it. The sideline attire actually does impact me way more than it should. And I know it's very rare. Jack Del Rio did it a little bit, the Jaguars. We had a few coaches here and there. Mike Nolan with the 49ers. I don't think it's an option for Shane Steichen. If he wears a suit game one, honestly, if I'm Chris Ballard or Jim Irsay, I'd fire him. You cannot wear a suit on the sideline. That is a one place on an NFL or even in sports. You cannot wear a suit. I know basketball has gone away from it for the most part. Hockey still is really the only suit left in terms of coaching. You cannot. That is the one area it looks, well, outside of baseball too, where it looks horrendous. It is terrible. If he wears a suit, George, I am very worried about the Colts' future.
I just hope that nobody follows baseball lead and starts putting all the coaches in uniform. I mean, can you imagine in all these other sports, you don't want to see the basketball coaches in uniform. You don't want to see the football coaches. So that would be a little bit interesting if they're out there.
I would love to see him in a shoulder pads and a helmet.
It happened to you.
Pretty scrawny, right? So it wouldn't even fill it out that much, but
no, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be as intimidating. I mean, there'd be some coaches that would be pretty intimidating. I think Mike Vrabel, would be a little frightening over there in shoulder.
He might try to sneak on the field. So actually, maybe it's like, not in uniform because I think he could still have some snaps left in him. And knowing the Colts, he'd probably get a big sack on 3rd down and win the game for Tennessee.
And D'Amico too. So I mean, there's 2 in the division that you probably wouldn't want to mess with. So
good call.
Probably want to avoid that for sure.
And Doug Peterson, backup quarterback, in case Trevor Lawrence gets hurt in the game, needs an emergency situation. that could be a situation. You're right. The Colts in that sense, when it comes to football players as coaches, are dead last in the AFC South. No doubt about that. But Shane Steichen decided to go buttoned up look blazer for the coach's photo. And that's very fitting, by the way, because in his press conference on Monday, very buttoned up about Lamar Jackson. Basically gave you nothing whatsoever. He basically gave you nothing on anything that you asked. He is very tight. He is someone who, whether it's learned through Nick Sirianni, whether it's learned through Frank Reich, or just being in the business, he, as a quote, George, says absolutely nothing. He does not want the media to know anything what he's thinking. So it makes sense. Maybe that's why he went the blazer buttoned up route, attire-wise buttoned up route when it comes to talking to the media.
Showing that personality. I do think he's going to be one of those guys that if you ask him about football, you'll get a pretty good answer, and you'll get a pretty, lengthy answer. And if you ask him about anything else, you're probably going to get cliches and what you got, the other day in Arizona, which is a lot of sort of obfuscation and, moving around the
like
subject. But well, we're in court, right? I got to come up with the big.
That's true. Shoot, I'm in trouble
today.
If you're dropping those words. I'm in big trouble already. Oh my goodness gracious, George! Wow, you are really coming out swinging. You've been practicing, and you watching Law and Order recently.
I know. I think it's just natural, right? I mean, don't I just look like a lawyer? I mean, come on.
Second career for sure. Moonlighting as a lawyer. Oh boy. Well, I think
I chose this of the two. The higher paying job.
That is for sure. That is for sure. And definitely we'll say the more entertaining job when it comes to covering this team in recent years. Never a dull moment. Speaking of which, George, we just talked about Shane Steichen being buttoned up and giving you nothing. I thought for sure, at least Chris Ballard, being his MO, would give you nothing when it comes to Lamar Jackson, and the news breaking on Monday. Lamar tweeting it himself that he has formally requested a trade away from the Ravens. I thought we were going to get some just BS answer from Chris Ballard about how, he's a good player. He's not on their team. We don't talk about players right now in other teams. But instead, when Chris Ballard was asked about Lamar Jackson, he said, quote, anytime a special player is available, which he is, you've got to do the work. And that's where I'm not going to get into deep discussions on where it's at or where we are or what we're doing or what we might do. But I'll tell you, he's a really good player, really special player. We'll get into Jim Irsay's comments here in a second, but that is the most we've heard Chris Ballard, I feel like, rave about a quarterback, really since Andrew Luck. He gives you nothing on any sort of draft prospect. Even in Carson Wentz, from all reports, he had to be convinced of it by Frank Reich to make the move. Look, Lamar Jackson obviously is MVP winner, so it's not like he's talking out of school or trying to hype up a quarterback that's not very good, but it's still news because this is the first time Chris Ballard has actually kind of spoken glowingly about a quarterback that's not on his roster.
Yeah, I was gonna say, especially about one that's not on his roster. That it's just not done with him. Usually that's the first thing out of his mouth was, well, he's not here. And we don't talk about guys from other areas. And then if he does, it's much more general than that. It's just maybe a little bit of praise here or there, but saying that they don't know what they're going to do and they don't have, or outright shooting it down. That we've seen a lot of that too. Is that's not a route I think we would go. That's one thing that really caught my eye yesterday. That's why I ended up writing a story basically off those comments, because I think it is very uncommon for him to say that about any player at any position, and for him to not just slam the door on an option like that. I mean, most of the time he either outright shoots it down or makes it pretty evident it's not a direction that they're going down. Really, you read those comments, they've obviously at least had internal talks about what it would take and about what they would do, and possibly had talks with either the Ravens or Lamar, towards that end. Now, I do think it's a really complicated situation, and I know, we'll get into more of that as we make our cases. We were talking before we just started recording, even things like how an offer sheet would work and what you could do, would it limit your ability to trade for the player afterwards if the Ravens wanted to, change the compensation from the 2 first-round picks? It's as complicated a situation as I can remember, honestly, in NFL free agency, because we don't see things like this very often, where it's essentially restricted free agency. Those guys usually, there's no chance that they would leave their team. And I still think, one of the biggest factors in all of this is Baltimore even willing to let him walk out? It may take Lamar doing things like he did, the other day, and basically giving a little bit of a push from his end to make something like this happen. But I think that's why when I listen to those comments or read those comments from Chris Ballard, I feel like he's basically saying that they're very interested, but it's an extremely complicated situation and you don't know how it will turn out.
So let me ask you this. A month ago, right, we were just getting to the offseason. It was just after Shane Steichen was hired, and we talked about how it is now lying season, right? These 2 months right after the Super Bowl leading to the draft, everyone is willing to talk, and there's all sorts of reports and speculation out there, but it's really tough to parse who is telling the truth, who is lying, who is trying to, make teams think one thing and do the old switcher and do another. So you hear Chris Ballard for the first time, George, like you said, actually talk in a positive way, not shoot the Lamar Jackson deal down. So now, right now, the Colts on the record are the first team to not say no to Lamar Jackson. They didn't say yes. They didn't say we're interested. They were just the first team that right now did not slam the door shut like we had, 5 or 6 teams do as soon as the non-exclusive tag was put on Lamar Jackson. Teams like the Falcons and the Dolphins said, we're not interested. We're not interested. Okay. Do you think Chris Ballard is telling the truth and that he actually is interested in a special former MVP winner in Lamar Jackson? Or is this a smokescreen? Is this a smokescreen to the Cardinals, maybe at number 3, who are trying to, rake the Colts over the coals for, a big trade compensation for maybe going up from 4 to 3? Is this a smokescreen to the Panthers and Texans maybe, or teams even behind the Colts that, oh, maybe the Colts are not that interested in a quarterback, so they won't trade up, so we don't have to trade up to number 3. We could sit back and let them pick. They'll pick someone else, and we don't have to worry about them getting a quarterback. Is this truth from Chris Ballard or more just a smokescreen, you think?
I tend to think it's truth for a couple of reasons. One, he's not big on the smokescreen game. I mean, like we said before, normally he just flat out denies things, even when it might help the team to kind of pretend that they were going in a different way. And 2, I think the other element in that makes me think that there is some validity to this is the fact that, if you look at what he said other than the Lamar Jackson situation, and even his comments during those same media availability, he said they're still not really all that certain who they want. They're still not a quarterback that's blown them away in this draft class. And so when I take those things together, and he's been saying that consistently, since we got him at the combine, when I take those two things together, I think there's genuine interest in Lamar Jackson, in large part because they're not sure who's going to be there at 4 or 3 if they were to trade up, and they're not sure yet which of those guys they prefer. Whereas, so to me, I think it's a bird in the hand, versus 2 in the bush kind of a situation right now.
Right.
What Lamar Jackson is. There's no projection here. There are concerns that we'll get into that I think people are well aware of, but the player you're getting. On the rookie side, it doesn't sound like they do yet. They don't have a real firm grasp on that right now. So I do believe it.
I think he's telling the truth as well because, like I said, he has been honest. For the most part, he is not someone who does play a lot of games. And there's also not a lot of reasons for him to talk glowingly about past quarterback prospects because, again, whether it's not having a first-round pick like they have twice, whether it's not being high enough in the draft, or whether it's just not having real options available to you, there's been not really an opportunity for Chris Ballard to talk glowingly about another quarterback, to make a move for you. Think about the past off seasons, the Colts tried to, get a solution. There's not been that many options. And again, Chris Ballard, I think, has sometimes been too patient, and I wish he was more aggressive, whether it's in the draft or more aggressive in pursuing guys like Russell Wilson, who were available last year. But the reality is there's not been that many quarterbacks open and where the Colts actually have a realistic chance to acquire for Chris Ballard to comment on. So I'm with you. I think he said he's a special player. I think obviously there's skill-wise, nothing to refute that. He's right about that aspect. And I think if you're Chris Ballard, you kind of look at the draft, you go, no one I like enough to trade up to number 1. Right now, number 4, there might not be anyone I'd like to take at number 4. Like you said, a bird in the hand. You look at Lamar Jackson, what he's been able to prove. There are concerns, but that's a guy that has shown you can win a lot of football games if he's healthy and on the field. Absolutely, I think I'm with you. Chris Ballard is telling the truth. Now, I thought that was surprising for him being as honest as he was. Also, we have Jim Irsay. Not a surprise. He was talking on Monday, and he was being honest as well. What I will be surprised, or at least what I'm surprised about, George, and we'll reach his comments here in a second, is that he was kind of the one who was kind of pumping the brakes on a possible Lamar deal. He had two concerns. He talked about the fully guaranteed deal and the draft compensation. This is Jim Irsay again talking to the media last night when he was talking about the fully guaranteed contract that Lamar reportedly is looking for. Jim Irsay said, quote, I don't believe fully guaranteed contracts would be good for our game at all. At all. I've seen what it's done to other sports leagues, and I just don't think it's a positive. Our game is great, and it's great for a number of reasons, but I don't think guaranteed contracts make our game greater. I think it makes it worse. He also talked about the draft compensation of 2 first-round picks. Jim Irsay said it has nothing to do with the actual dollars. I mean, paying a contract like that is not a problem for me. That's not the issue. I mean, the issue is what's the right thing to do for the franchise in terms of what helps us win in the long run. I mean, you need more than just a quarterback, and he was referencing the 2 first-round picks that the Colts right now would have to give up in an offer sheet because not only do you have to pay Lamar a lot of money, now it hurt the salary cap, also you take 2 valuable assets away in 2 first-round picks that you could use to build up other positions of need, which the Colts have, in order to make your team a true Super Bowl contender. 2 things, George. Number 1, I'm surprised of the 2, Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay. If you said one said he's a special player, one said, yeah, but let's pump the brakes. Money and draft picks are a big concern here. I would have bet my life. Chris Ballard was the one who's kind of pouring more cold water on it than Jim Irsay. Obviously, it's 2023. The world we're living is backwards right now. Jim Irsay is the one pouring cold water on it. This, to me, though, George, tells me Jim Irsay is all in on drafting a quarterback. Even though Lamar Jackson is 26 and an MVP winner, he's not a Band-Aid. But I think he's going back to what he was sold with Carson Wentz, where Carson Wentz was of a similar age, and he didn't win an MVP, but he was on track to win an MVP before he tore his ACL back in 2017. I think Jim Irsay right now is kind of reliving the Carson Wentz nightmare and is afraid to do that again, even though the quarterback in Lamar Jackson is 30 times better than Carson Wentz ever was. I think Jim Irsay at this point, those comments are telling you he's all in on drafting a quarterback. And I think he's all in on realizing this team is not as close as maybe some think or not as close as he wishes. And Lamar Jackson is not one of those things where you plug in and now all of a sudden, just like that, overnight, they're Super Bowl contenders. Jim Irsay is actually, I think, being reasonable and rational for the first time with his expectations. The man who a few years ago said, in the next decade, the Colts will win 2 Lombardi trophies. You would think then Jim Irsay would be all over a guy like Lamar to go get on your team and pursue those 2 Super Bowl wins. But I think Jim Irsay, for the first time, is actually recognizing we are not close. We need to develop. We need to build this roster more than just a quarterback. I actually think I like, honestly, what Jim Irsay has to say. I think his vision and his plan for this team is spot on. And I honestly have no problem with Jim Irsay saying, let's pump the brakes. Let's go for development of the entire team instead of, again, grabbing the shiny object and trying to be Super Bowl contenders when deep down he knows they're not.
Yeah, I think along those lines too, he mentioned somewhere later in those comments that Ballard won't be so much judged here on wins and losses as he will be on the direction that the franchise is going in.
Great call.
He said you kind of feel like you have a feel, and you're going the right way, which is also leaning towards the idea of developing a young quarterback. I mean, in so many words, if you read between the lines in that quote, he's basically saying he'll be judged on how that quarterback looks when you bring in the young guy. Do you feel like you got the right guy? Do you feel like you're moving in the right direction? Or does it feel like you drop the ball on that pick and things are not going so well? Which also tells me Chris Ballard's probably not going. We've been talking about this for a while. He's probably not going to survive another really down year like last year. Anything that would end up with Caleb Williams coming here, he's not going to survive that.
Fight on, George.
So,
for those watching on video, or at least listening, George gave you the fight on signal.
I feel like I have to do that anytime I mention Caleb Williams. Like, I think that's contractual obligation there, right? Like that's how that works, I think. But that to me, tells me they're being patient on one hand, but not on the other. They're patient in the idea that they understand that the roster has to be built. There's no more talk about multiple Lombardis and some of the things that have come out the last few years, but they're not patient to the extent where, if this is a 2 or 3 win season, they're going to keep things the way they are.
Do you think, because I actually took those comments as just like, okay, Jim Irsay actually has a plan for, let's say, maybe the next 3 or 4 years, not this year. So he's not putting playoffs or bust on a team that, like I said, could have maybe Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew in their quarterback room starting games this year. I actually kind of took it as, even if the Colts get the number one overall pick, but whatever their plan is, if it works, I think Chris Ballard, I would say, is more likely than not back next year, no matter what. I guess unless I'm trying to like, because again, like the thing is like with where they're picking, whether it's Anthony Richardson, Will Levis for the most part, right? That's, I think, the two quarterbacks we can assume right now at pick number 4 you're going to take. Maybe their plan is to, like I said, take a defensive player, best available player on the board, or trade back and try to get Hendon Hooker. I guess maybe the only way he gets fired is if you do trade back and let's say, okay, we're all in on Hendon Hooker. We're going to, get him in the later rounds, and a team either trades up or in front of you gets him before you can. And now you're sitting there empty-handed with no quarterback, and now you're rolling with Gardner Minshew. It's a disaster. I think maybe that's the only way Chris Ballard is fired right now. But at least from the comments yesterday, I kind of feel like Jim Irsay is looking at 2023 not as like a standalone year, but as part of maybe a 3, 4, 5-year plan where if they have 2 wins, but you're sitting there getting Caleb Williams, I could see like Chris Ballard or Jim Irsay saying, okay, now is when you start to get judged. When you get that quarterback, now let's take off, instead of, oh, you're 2-15. You're fired, and someone else is going to get the benefit of getting Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends again on how it went. I mean, that's sort of the way you talked. I think it's not so much what happens, but how it happens. If it's a bad year, but a lot of things look like they're heading in the right direction. You see improvement on the offensive line, and the young quarterback looks good, and the rest of the roster gives you reason for hope. I think that's going to be a completely different situation than if it's a year like last year. I guess that's what I should be more specific. I think if it's a year like last year, where you just walk away thinking this is broken and it needs a lot of work to be fixed. I don't think you can survive that again, is what I'm saying. Where there's just all hope is sucked out of the building, and you just feel like the franchise is not getting where it needs to go. Now I think what's going to be tough about that is, the way Jim Irsay worded a lot of this, what the criteria is going to be is hard to really pin down, because he's basically saying you'll know it when you see it. So I think for him, it's going to be an obvious answer. It might not be so obvious for the rest of us on the outside.
Well, the good news for Chris Ballard is that I don't see a circumstance, and maybe this is just opening Pandora's box and maybe, having the sports gods go do their work. I don't see a situation or a scenario where we're looking at Jeff Saturday being on the sidelines next year whatsoever. So for Chris Ballard, I think you could say, okay, at least we won't have a repeat head coaching wise of what we saw last year, where the train was wobbling. It was not very good. And then just completely was right off the tracks, fell off a cliff into the ocean, swept into a black hole and into the abyss. And it was just, like I said, a total laughing stock, a total clown show for the last 9 weeks of the season. I think Chris Ballard, at least you could feel comfortable that will not be a repeat in 2023. Knock on wood, George. I got to knock on wood here. I am superstitious. You never know, but I feel pretty confident saying the back half of 2022 will not repeat itself in 2023. That is for sure. All right, so before we go to court here, before we make our grand entrance and make our plea and our case to the judge, to the jury, let me just ask you this. So we heard Chris Ballard's comments, and we just read you Chris Ballard's comments. We just read you Jim Irsay's comments as well. Right now, Vegas has the Colts as the betting favorite to trade for Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson is traded, where do you think right now the Colts are? Like, if he's moved and we get an alert next month, 2 months from now, Lamar's moved, do you think it's to the Colts? Is that the most likely destination?
I think it makes the most sense. But what's, I guess, frightening in a bit to me is that the second team that makes the most sense is also in the division. I mean, I think the Colts and the Titans, to me, make the most sense right now in terms of their ability to get another quarterback of that caliber, their ability to accept the contract, their ability to work him into their system. In both cases, you'd be putting Lamar with a really dangerous running back, better than any he's had. And honestly, I think in Indy's case, if you look at what they've had in Baltimore, you could make the case that Michael Pittman will be the best receiver that Lamar Jackson's played with in his career. As much as we complain, and I think rightfully so, about some things in this skill set here, Baltimore hasn't done a much better job in that regard. So I just think, I think Steichen is a big part of this. I mean, it's not that hard. I don't want to start making the case, but it's not that hard to envision, Lamar Jackson playing in a Jalen Hurts style offense and what that might look like. And I think that's a big driving force behind this. But I think the underlining thing for me is that I'm still not convinced Baltimore is going to let him go. I know he wants out, but they still control all the cards here. They're still, they can still match any offer sheet he gets. They still have the franchise tag on him. So, unless he pushes himself out, unless he makes him just untenable for them to keep him, I still think Baltimore is the most likely place he'll be next year.
But if traded, well, because you're right, there's a chance that Baltimore matches. There's a chance that not they match the offer. And again, this is a moot comment. But if trade, you think it's the most likely option, the Colts?
It seems like it to me. I mean, when you look out there at the people who've said no, and granted, some of those may be lying, and you look at the teams that are in need of a quarterback. I mean, he's not going to Carolina. He's not going to Houston. We know those two are off the board. I don't think he's going to Seattle. You wouldn't have signed Geno Smith even for this year if that was your plan up there. You look around the teams that are in need. Maybe Washington, works their way into this, but with the situation there with ownership, I don't know really if they can swing a deal like this right now. I don't know how that works. I don't know enough about the ownership process to know whether that's a hindrance or if it would actually help sell. I'm just not well versed enough in that area. But outside of that, I'm just trying to go through my mind, like who needs a quarterback? The Raiders signed Garoppolo. You wouldn't think they're in the mix here anymore. Detroit, I maybe they're a surprise team that could come in and do something like this. And then for the second offseason in 3 or 4 here, Jared Goff will get shipped off to another team, surprisingly. But there's just not a lot of other fits. Again, to me, it's the Colts and the Titans. And between those two, only one of them has openly said that they're interested. So, yeah, I would say the Colts, if I had to make, a betting list like the one you're talking about, I would probably put the Colts at the top of it.
I would be, if he's traded, I would be surprised if he goes to the Colts. And I'm not saying that because and I don't want the Colts to make the trade. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to be biased here. But I think you hear Jim Irsay's comments. I think to me, that sounds like a man who is dead set on drafting a quarterback. And I think to me, Jim Irsay has already accepted the plan that they're not going to be very good in 2023. I think he's accepted the fact that they're not as good as maybe he hoped. And I think he's also accepted the plan that you're going to have to get worse before you get better. And things are going to, there's still more growing pains where it's not just the back end of 2022. You go through the suffering and now it's okay. Now we're rising up. I think for the first time in a long time, Jim Irsay has accepted the fact that, what? We actually have a lot of work to do to get this roster where it needs to be. It's not as good as we envisioned. And I think to me, that sounds like a man who is not in a rush to do the quick fix. It sounds like a man who is burned by Carson Wentz. And again, even though Lamar Jackson is a lot better than Carson Wentz, I think Jim Irsay is very apprehensive to give up the draft capital and pay the money, even though he can afford it. Just pay that large of a chunk of the salary cap to one player when there's still holes on the roster, when you are going to be a Super Bowl contender. But again, you trade for Lamar Jackson, you're going for it, right? This is not like a 3-year build with Lamar. It's right now, boom, okay, he's in his prime, you're going for it. I think Jim Irsay yesterday, those comments to me sounded like someone who has accepted the fact that it's going to get worse before it gets better, and we're going to have to go youth in terms of trying to build up this roster and have it be a progression plan of, let's say, 3 years instead of just right back on the horse in 2023, thinking that this team is a Super Bowl contender or a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl contender like they thought in the previous offseason. So go figure. Jim Irsay is the one that's convinced me that even though Vegas says it's good, like the likelihood happen, I don't think so. You mentioned Detroit. That's a team that's interesting in terms of having, 2 first-round picks. And from what I read, you could give one this year and one next year, and it'd be the lesser of the 2 first-round picks. So the Lions could trade for Lamar and hold the 6th overall pick. It could. I think a lot of teams that come draft time will be more active, more interested in Lamar than right now, where it's literally the Colts are the only team that said, we'll think about it. We're not going to sign the door shut right now. All right, George, speaking of which, it's time to go to court. I do not have a gavel. Also, I'm not the judge, so I guess I don't really need a gavel. But we are entering the courtroom here to make our case now that Lamar Jackson has officially requested a trade and is officially on the market. why the Colts should make a move for Lamar Jackson, why the Colts should not make a move for Lamar Jackson. George, you are, I think, in the majority of the masses and thinking, yes, let's make an offer. So let's trade for him. So I think you should get the floor first. So first, sir, you can make your cases why the Colts should do it. And the jury, they are now in session. Court is in session. George, the time is yours.
For me, it all starts with one simple thing. I think it's time to no longer look for the third or fourth best quarterback option in a given offseason. You know, I feel like that's been the problem since Andrew Luck retired. They've never gone out and said, here's the best thing we could do. Here's the best player available to us, and we're going to go get him. You know, they didn't get Tom Brady. They didn't get Matthew Stafford. Even though it didn't work out for Denver last year, they didn't get Russell Wilson, you know, and maybe that wouldn't have worked any better here. But I think more than the veteran carousel right now, the bigger issue here has been the lack of aggressiveness. The idea of you're shopping for a quarterback at a garage sale and you're going to find the best deal, you know, instead of going out and getting the brand name difference maker at that position. And so for me, that's why I'm all in on. I was all in on trading up to number one. I thought that was the best plan. And I still think that would have been the best plan, but obviously can't do that anymore. You can't hit reset. This isn't Madden. You can't start over. So now I think the most aggressive thing that you can do to address the most important position on the field is to go and trade for Lamar Jackson.
Case closed. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here is my case as to why the Colts should not pursue Lamar Jackson. George, let me ask you this. You saw it firsthand, unfortunately. The great Andrew Luck, the sweet Andrew Luck, the man we all thought was going to be the answer, was going to be the franchise legend, and even have more success than Peyton Manning when it comes to championships one day. We thought this was the guy, the answer, the man. And unfortunately, as you sit here in 2023, he is no longer there. Why is that, George? Injuries.
He is injured.
Injuries. It got to the point where a simple calf injury forced Andrew Luck out of retirement. And now the Colts
and
have
Adam Schefter.
And Adam Schefter. Thank you, Shefty, for ruining that and making what was a surreal environment in a preseason game. That is for sure. But now, Colts fans, since that tragic day in August, that Andrew Luck unfortunately called it quits way earlier than he should have. We have been looking. We have been searching high and low, uncovering some rocks. Like George mentioned, he is correct. Going to the bargain store more than we would have liked for a quarterback and for the answer. Trying to do duct tape and glue and hoping that that fixes the bumper full time when we know that does not. And now the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, those in the Lamar Jackson camp, are trying to sell the idea that the answer, the real fix, the next decade-long solution for the Colts to get back to Super Bowl contention, find their franchise quarterback, and compete for championships yet again, is a quarterback that we have seen in the last 2 years suffer the same fate as Andrew Luck. Injuries. Missed a lot of time in Baltimore with those injuries. Missed 11 games in 2 years. Also, George, not just 11 games, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, 11 of the most important games of the Ravens season were in 2021. The Ravens missed the playoffs because Lamar got hurt. In 2022, they made the playoffs, but lost a playoff game easily because Lamar Jackson was not on the field that day. So I ask you this, is really the answer, the guy that we are going to say, that's the guy, boom, the Colts are off the quarterback carousel, really a guy who has the same injury issues recently as the once loved franchise quarterback that we thought was going to be the answer? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I say no. On top of that, the other point I have, if Lamar Jackson is healthy, if the Colts get lucky, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Colts fans nationwide that are listening, Lamar is healthy. He plays 17 games. The Colts are in the playoffs. They win the division. They get a home playoff game. You're going to be paying your quarterback, what, $240, $250 million, most of that, if all of it fully guaranteed. You would think with that money, you are buying a playoff performer, someone who plays their best football when it matters the most, going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence now as well. Well, the issue, ladies and gentlemen, is that Lamar Jackson has been in the playoffs 4 times. 4 games over 3 years. And Lamar Jackson and the Ravens record in those playoffs are 1-3. And Lamar Jackson has not played well in any of those 4 playoff games. And he's had years, 3 years, to improve, get better, learn from it. And instead, he has stayed the same, if not regressed. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, You want to trade 2 first-round picks when the Colts need help on the roster. You want to give Lamar Jackson a massive, historical, record-breaking, guaranteed money sort of contract for a guy that can't stay healthy, and also for a guy that has shown you in multiple instances cannot play well in the playoffs. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not telling you Anthony Richardson is the answer. I'm not telling you Will Levis is the answer. I'm not telling you Hendon Hooker is the answer. But I know this. I'd rather keep my options open. I'd rather maintain financial and draft capital flexibility right now when it comes to pivoting if the franchise quarterback does become available this year, next year, down the road, than right now go all in on Lamar Jackson for a guy that can't stay healthy, can't play the biggest games of the season, and can't play well in the playoffs. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm Chris Ballard, if I'm Jim Irsay, I say, Lamar, thank you, but no thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Colts fans everywhere, I rest my case. What do you think, George?
I am telling you the answer is Hendon Hooker, but that's beside the point.
Oh, I think I may quit sports and go into law.
That was a very good opening statement. Very professional, very well researched. And I think also it underlines one of the biggest things in all of this that I think is very important to point out. This is a very complicated situation, and it's a very difficult situation. I don't think it is cut and dried. You know, I'm on the side of, hey, do it. But I don't think this is a no-brainer. I don't think this is a situation that you just walk into. If it was, Baltimore already would have signed him to a multi-year deal and he wouldn't be available. I mean, anybody who is on the market is on the market for a reason. And so, you know, I think that's an important thing to point out. I think sometimes in the social media discourse, we just get to this is right and this is wrong. And I don't think that this situation is shades of gray in between here.
You are, yes, that is, we are on opposite sides here. That is, I think, the middle ground we can agree on. This is very complicated. This is not black and white. This is multi-layered when it comes to making a trade for Lamar Jackson. That's for sure. Okay. So George made his case as to why the Colts should trade for Lamar Jackson. I made my case why the Colts should not trade for Lamar Jackson. But we didn't just want to make this about me and George. We wanted to get you, the listener, involved. So we appreciate all of you that have chimed in so far, whether it's on Twitter. You can get George at GM Bremer. You can get me at Ryan_Hickey, the number 3. Whether it's on, commenting in the comment section, wherever you do get your podcasts, the Blue Horseshoe Pod, the bright blue logo, that's where you can find us. Or on YouTube, the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Make sure you download, or not even download, I shouldn't say, subscribe to our YouTube channel, where every single episode is uploaded in video form, and also we release shorts as well. We appreciate all that have contributed and have also taken up a second career in law, making the case for or against Lamar Jackson. So now that we have made our opening statements, George, I figured now it's time to call some witnesses to the stand and have them make their case. So I figured this is how maybe we'll do it. We have a lot of cases why the Colts should trade for Lamar Jackson, why the Colts should not trade for Lamar Jackson. So I figured maybe we'll do the opposite here. So I will read you a few cases of people, of fans that don't think they should, and you can respond. Maybe give your counter argument, argue why that point, in one case you don't agree with it, and I can do, argue against those that are for. So we figure we'll go back and forth here to kind of, again, practice our lawyer skills and really kind of get back in the courtroom here. So let's start with, because the majority is on your side, George, we'll start with one on your side and arguing why the Colts should trade for Lamar Jackson. Slick Reynolds does tweet us on Twitter. He said the case for why the Colts should trade for Lamar is that he is young, he's 26 years old, talented, MVP winner, a weapon unlike any other, a proven winner in all caps, and puts asses in the seats and Colts into primetime games. That option is better than rolling the dice at pick number 4 and maybe hitting on a quarterback. I get what Slick is saying, and when it comes to being young at 26, I can't argue with that. Talented, MVP winner, I can't argue with that. A weapon unlike any other, I cannot argue that. I cannot. Here's what concerns me, though. A proven winner. We just talked on the playoffs. Lamar Jackson's regular season record is 45-16. There's no doubt about Lamar Jackson's ability to get the Colts in the playoffs and win games consistently in the regular season. But for me, again, if you're going to give a record-breaking contract, and that's what it's going to take to get Lamar Jackson, right? Whether it's $200 million fully guaranteed, $230 million fully guaranteed, even if it's $250 with $240 million fully guaranteed, you are giving Lamar Jackson either the second highest or the highest contract in some standard that sets the new market in order to get Lamar away from the Ravens, in order to make sure that Baltimore does not match the offer. If I'm paying my quarterback that amount of money and really hindering my salary cap, I want a guarantee in terms of playoff performance, or at least I don't want a major concern. The unknown, okay, I get is there because there's some quarterbacks that don't have a chance by the time they get paid to really show you, if they are playoff performers. In the case of the Chargers with Justin Herbert, he's going to get a contract extension this offseason. Is he a truly elite playoff player? We saw him in one game, 1.5 he was great, 1.5 he was not. The jury's still out on that. But I think over 3 seasons and 4 games, that's enough of an early sample size to tell you how a quarterback is in the playoffs. Right now, I do not like what I see. So for me, again, if I'm going to pay that money and give up that draft capital, I want a guy that I know in a loaded AFC, that is not just good enough to get me to the playoffs, but that can win playoff games and get you to the Super Bowl. And for me right now, with what we've seen from Lamar Jackson, I don't feel comfortable in saying that's absolutely the case. All right.
It's a loaded AFC. It's absolutely loaded AFC. One counter argument to his playoff record. 2 words, Greg Roman. I don't think he took full advantage of what Lamar can do. And I think from what we've seen, Shane Steichen will. If he's able to do what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philly, I think you'd see a completely different player in the postseason. But that's projection, and I don't know if the court will allow projection. So that's
allow it. It's part of the calculus. But again, I am a little leery of the projection. And like I said, you are more comfortable projecting more than I am. So that is a case for
I'm all about hypotheticals.
Yeah. You are the opposite of Shane Steichen. This guy despises hypotheticals. You say the H word, he shuts down the question. We're not going there. We're not doing hypotheticals. So someone has to show the hypotheticals some love. That's where you are on the other end. Can't get enough of them. How about
I gotta bounce that out.
Yeah, that is for sure. Okay, so we had a case 4. Let's go to a case again. Zach Spalding 5 on Twitter writes us, why buy a broken down used car for the price of a new one? That is his counter argument as to why the Colts should not pursue Lamar Jackson. Your retort?
First of all, I would argue that we don't know that he's a broken down used car. I mean, the eloquent and outstanding opening statement made by my opposing counsel here mentioned those missed games that are absolute fact. That's a matter of record. We're not going to try to convince the court otherwise here today. But there's a lot of question about just how hurt Lamar Jackson was at the end of last year and how much of that had to do with him feeling, as he said on Twitter, that the Ravens are unwilling to meet his value. He was playing under a deal that he was, I don't want to say forced into, but the goal last year was not for him to play under his 5th-year option. It was to find a long-term deal, and it didn't happen. And so there has been a great deal of speculation. And while I'm doing hypotheticals, I'll also do speculation. I'm the most unprofessional lawyer of all time, but hey, you know what? What I'm here for. There has been a great deal of speculation that he was doing some calculus there and saying, if you're not going to pay me what I'm worth, I'm not going to push beyond reasonable limits to get out on the field. Some of his teammates kind of even made reference to that in offhanded, cryptic ways. So I guess I'm not accepting that he's a broken down lemon at this point. I've seen him play close to a full season in the 2 years prior to these last 2 seasons. And again, I'm not certain that he couldn't have been on the field had circumstances been a little bit different last year. Now that raises a whole other set of questions.
I was just going to say
about that.
What's more concerning in your mind?
I'm actually okay with it. And I know people are probably going to say like, why? And it's not because of the side that I'm on. It's because NFL careers are so short, as we know, and nothing is guaranteed to you, as Andrew Luck shows. And I think at a certain level, a team has to meet a player halfway. And so I think if you're going to tell a guy, we want to bargain this year and we're not going to go all in and give you what the market says you're worth, I think it's perfectly reasonable for that player to say, I'm going to play as hard as I can. I'm going to do everything I can, but I'm not going 110%. I'm not going above and beyond for you. I'm going to do everything reasonable to help my team, but I'm not going to put my career at risk, which is what I think everybody agrees that's what he was going to do. The injury may not have been bad enough that he could not have played under any circumstances, but it was bad enough that if he's out there, I guess to me, I look at RG3. That's where I go back to in that situation. If RG3 had the power at that point in his career to say, you know what, this is not the time. I don't need to be out there. Could he have saved his whole career? I don't know. And so if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm not risking the rest of my career for a team that's not shown me they're all in on me.
For the record, I think Lamar was hurt. I don't think he was milking it. I don't think he actually was healthy enough to play. I think he was truly injured and could not play in the playoff game against the Bengals. With that said, if he actually could have played, if he was milking this, that to me is a major red flag. And if I'm the Colts, I'm out because yes, I get it. It happened to the Ravens and it happened because the Ravens didn't show him the love he wanted. But there's no reason to think that if you trade for Lamar Jackson, give him the contract he wants 3, 4, 5 years from now when it's time to get another contract, or if he outplays this contract and now there's, because we know the quarterback market always, re-ups each other and everyone's jumping. And now Patrick Mahomes, after signing a $500 million deal a few years ago, is now like a bargain. It's like, oh my God, Patrick Mahomes is like the 5th highest quarterback paid. This is a steal. We have the Chiefs. We know those quarterback contracts, they age out fast in terms of being the highest paid and everyone's jumping. So let's say 4 years from now, the Colts give a 5-year, $250 million fully guaranteed deal. And we're sitting here 3 years from now. And while that right now is the highest paid deal on a record deal, 3 years from now, that could be the 6th highest, paid deal. And Lamar Jackson is playing like an MVP level and the Colts are winning a ton of games. And he's saying, well, I want, let's go back to the table. I'm getting underpaid. I want a new deal. And the Colts are saying, no, right now we're happy with where we are. Who's to say that won't happen again? Who's to say all of a sudden Lamar won't, start feeling some hamstring tightness in week 16 and now all of a sudden your season's over?
I think it's apples and oranges though, because this is a situation and two things. One, I do think he was hurt. I think he was hurt to a point that he shouldn't have played. I think that's a big, important part of this. To me, there's a difference between should you play and could you play. That's where I think the gray area is in this situation. I think he could have played, but he shouldn't have played, if that makes sense. And so it didn't ultimately. But I also think it's apples and oranges in a situation like that, because I think the issue here is that he's already given the Ravens more than his contract had specified to begin with. And they're, whether or not you agree with their stance, they're not ponying up. The time was now. This isn't a situation where he was wanting a new deal or where, he was trying to get something earlier than it was owed to him. Everybody else, when it's this time, except for the one like outlier I can think of here is Washington and the Kirk Cousins situation. Everybody else, when they got to this point in the rookie deal, where it's the rookie year option, worked out a long-term contract. That's what you do with your franchise quarterback. That's where I think there's a deeper gulf here than would normally be, because in purely business terms, the Ravens disrespected him by not working out a long-term deal. And I don't know all the details in that, obviously, what was offered and what wasn't offered, and it's another reason why, and to speak to some of your concerns, Ryan, I would look more like 3 years and $150 million if I'm the Colts. It gives you insurance if the injuries continue, but it also gives Lamar a chance to hit the market again, like we were just talking about. That if you had 3 years, $150 million this time around, by the time you're coming back at the end of that contract, you may almost double that, where the market's at. So I would look more in that range, but I don't know what he's looking for.
I'm with you, by the way. Like, if Lamar wants a short-term 3-year deal, I would do 3 for 150. But I don't think he wants that. Like, we talked about this when, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago when we were doing the podcast, and Lamar was tweeting and we was kind of talking about how, the Ravens, at the time it was ambiguous. We didn't know if that's what the Ravens offered. That's what he was looking at. But he talked about, in a laughing emoji, 3 years, $133 million fully guaranteed. I wasn't sure if that was Lamar Jackson saying that's what he wanted. Like, boom, I don't need an agent because this is what I'm looking for. Or he was kind of laughing at the offer the Ravens got him. I think now when you look back at it a few weeks later and getting more context, it sounds like through reports, that's what the Ravens offered him. And he's laughing that out of the building. So I'm with you. If it's a 3-year deal, the short term for me is the priority. I would go for that. I just don't think right now that's anywhere near on Lamar Jackson's radar. I don't think that's a deal that's going to get done. I think he wants 5-6 years in terms of a Deshaun Watson-esque deal. That's where, to me, I do get very concerned in terms of committing to Lamar Jackson. for the long term. Speaking of committing to Lamar Jackson, another case as to why the Colts should trade for Lamar Jackson from McLovin Robbery, which I'm assuming this is from Superbad. Tremendous reference. But quarterback arguably is the most important position in football. Lamar solves QB position for a decade, no brainer. Let me ask you this. Does he, though? Does he actually solve the position for a decade, no brainer? Because again, we just saw it 2 years in a row. Injuries take a toll. And when you look at Shane Steichen and his offense too, this is what also is a little bit concerning. Look at how he utilizes quarterbacks that are mobile. Last year, Jalen Hurts led all quarterbacks with 165 rush attempts. We saw Jalen Hurts run the ball a ton. Now, he is built like a truck. That dude is powerlifting. He is squatting like 600 pounds. He is basically a linebacker, a little shorter, but basically an Andrew Luck kind of build, muscular, massive at quarterback. So he could afford to take 165 plus hits in a season. Lamar Jackson is fast, nimble. He's solidly built, but he's more of a stick than Jalen Hurts is. I'm concerned that, again, if you're going to try to make Lamar Jackson your franchise quarterback for the next decade, I don't think he's going to hold up. Because the scary part, too, for me, George, is the fact that when you look at how Lamar got injured the last 2 years, he didn't get injured running the ball. He got injured in the pocket just trying to evade sacks. 1 year's an ankle injury, the next year's a knee injury. Like, that was just a normal quarterback play. So if he is right now showing some durability concerns in the pocket, well, what if Shane Steichen adopts what he did with Jalen Hurts and now you're running the ball 170 times, 160, 150 times next year? Is he going to hold up 2, 3, 4 years in a row with that? We saw even a guy like Cam Newton get worn down, after a good amount of time with his workload. I just get nervous that we're talking about a guy who, yes, is 26 and should fit the decade mold in terms of getting your quarterback and a franchise guy for that long. I just right now don't trust Lamar Jackson. He's going to be holding up for even the next 5 years, let alone the next 10 years.
Yeah, I look at the pocket thing a little bit differently because I think of it more in terms of what happened with Paris Campbell. I think it's more of a fluke kind of situation or a circumstantial situation than it is something that's evidence that it's going to continue. I think it was just a couple of plays that didn't go his way, unfortunately, and that happens in this league. You're going to end up getting your quarterback. Most quarterbacks can get hurt at some point in their career. You hope that it doesn't happen, but very few of them are Brett Favre and go 200 and however many games that was, on the field. It's just part of the game. And so, but I do think he's going to have to change his style. That's been proven. At some point he's going to have to change his style. I mean, when you look at the running quarterbacks, it's a shelf life similar to running backs. They're gone in an instant because it's what happens. But I look at with Lamar, I look at Michael Vick. You're going to have to change who you are at some point. If you look at Michael Vick as a Falcon and Michael Vick as an Eagle, very successful in both of those careers, very different quarterback, very different style of play. And I think that transition is going to have to happen with Lamar Jackson at some point, not right now, but at some point in his career. And I would argue that Shane Steichen is the kind of coach you would want overseeing a transition like that.
Yes, but also is concerned that now, again, you're going to give up this draft capital and pay Lamar this massive salary and then ask him to change his style without knowing if he can actually adapt to more of, let's say, a throwing offense, more of, a different style of offense than he's used to running in Baltimore, where he had a lot of success and won an MVP. A case against Lamar Jackson, George, this one's for you here. Ben writes on Twitter, haven't we learned anything about injured quarterbacks? And then he included an Andrew Luck gif as well, just to really drive the point home.
Yeah, again, you mentioned that in your opening statement. I think it's the number one argument against doing this. Obviously, this franchise, more than any other, is going to be concerned with the health of the quarterback because of what it's gone through the last few years. My argument against that is simple. I would rather have a quarterback and trust Rusty Jones to keep him healthy and trust my coaching staff to get him ready every week, who I know can go out there and perform on the field, than not have a quarterback and try to fix that. I guess I would rather find a way to keep my quarterback on the field, who I already have, than find a way to create a quarterback out of thin air who can help me win football games.
Kyle Winslow then doubles back. We'll go one more against here, George, and kind of circle back to the 4. He writes, Super Bowl window opens when you get a great player on a rookie contract, then fill the needs in free agency, not the other way around. What are your thoughts there on that one, George?
I would say recent NFL history says that's not the case. I mean, I look at the last 3 Super Bowl winners, and that's not at all how they were built. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers signed Tom Brady and then signed a bunch of free agents and then won the Super Bowl on their own home field in a weird pandemic year. The Los Angeles Rams signed Matthew Stafford and then signed and traded for a bunch of free agents and won the Super Bowl. And the Chiefs did something we've never seen before, gave their quarterback a $50 million deal, let their best wide receiver, maybe the best wide receiver in the league, walk and won the Super Bowl. So I would say that that's more of a narrative that's out there and not something that's actually happening on the field.
All right. That is your retorts. Let's go back to some that are on your side that are for a Lamar Jackson trade. Cloud Strife 2021 writes, trading for Lamar is much cheaper than moving up to spots 1 to 3 in the draft, and Steichen just made the Super Bowl with a running quarterback. Is it though? Like, how is it cheaper? I know if you want to look at what the Panthers gave up going from 9 to 1, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a receiver in DJ Moore, who's basically either a third first round, if you want to look at that, or a really damn good number 1 option for now, Justin Fields. It's a heavy price to pay. Are the Colts, if they, let's say the Panthers open up shop for whatever godforsaken reason, they like all 4 quarterbacks. They love all 4, and they said, you know what? We're going to trade back to number 4 because it doesn't matter who we get. We're just going to recoup some of the assets we gave away, and the Colts can trade up for even 2 first-round picks.
That would be the most 2023 thing ever, just for the record.
Holy cow. You give up an arm and a leg to move up, and now it's, you know what? Actually, we're going to go back down to 4 and trade down after getting all the way up to
Buyer's
number 1.
remorse.
Holy cow, yeah. Well, that's also true, right? Oh, shoot. These guys suck. What do we do? That's actually, there's 2 ways to look at that, that's for sure. Either this is the best draft class in history, and 1 through 4 are guaranteed locks, or this is the worst draft class, and we got to get out of it. We got to get something back. Try to cash out after you make a bet that you don't like before it hits. Let's just cash out now and get, pennies back on the dollar before it's too late. But I don't see how it's cheaper to get Lamar Jackson than it is to draft, even trade up in this made-up scenario of the Panthers opening up shop again, just because, again, for Lamar, it's twofold. It's the draft compensation and it's the salary. Sure, 2 first-round picks, if you want to just say it, let's just for argument's sake, let's say the Colts either had the option of 2 firsts, 2 seconds of Michael Pittman Jr. or Lamar Jackson. Right? That's the 2 options. Sure, it's cheaper to give up just 2 first-round picks and 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a really good wide receiver. But the thing is, though, what you get, at least in giving up the draft capital, is flexibility financially. Where whatever quarterback you have, at least you have now a quarterback on a cheap rookie deal where you can, again, for a Colts team that has a lot of holes, still plug those holes, whether it's at corner, whether it's offensive line, getting another receiver in the mix. Like, there are plenty of areas the Colts could use that money to either trade for someone or sign someone in order to make this roster better going forward compared to, again, getting Lamar Jackson, giving him that big-time deal, and now you're running out there with, again, a roster that we just saw go 4-12-1. Are they going to be better with Lamar Jackson and Shane Steichen? Absolutely. Are they in the level right now of the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals, even the Jaguars? No, they're not, even with Lamar Jackson. And it makes it a whole hell of a lot harder when you have a quarterback on a massive salary to close the gap on those elite teams because, again, you have holes right now and not enough money to fill it. So technically on the surface, sure, 2 first-round picks, if we want to do math here, is less than what the Panthers gave up 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a player. But I think the money really balances out where you're giving Lamar Jackson a record deal in some instance where you have just a dirt cheap rookie quarterback on a rookie deal that gives you roster flexibility, salary cap flexibility elsewhere. So I would argue it's not cheaper to get Lamar. It's actually more expensive when you add in, again, the draft compensation and the salary, which, again, you have to include both here, right? That's obviously part of the reason why I think it's such a debate of whether the Colts should or should not trade for Lamar. Let me ask you this, George.
The owner agrees with you too, by the way.
That is
the
true.
Owner said it in black and white.
That is very true. That the guaranteed money, putting that in escrow, no problem for Jim Irsay. That's just one less guitar he has to buy. But given those 2 first-round picks and the money in escrow, that's where Jim Irsay says, thanks, but no thanks. G Does Sports tweet. Now, this is for your argument for trading for Lamar, but this is actually an interesting scenario. I want to get your thoughts on this. He said the Colts should trade back for number 4, get more assets for the 2024-2025 draft, and offer Lamar Jackson an offer sheet after the 2023 draft. Is that, I don't know if that's I guess it's feasible in a way. I'm not sure what you're getting. Like the thing is, if you trade back to from number 4, you're getting an asset. If there's even a market there, like if 3 quarterbacks are gone already, is there a market where a team like the Raiders or a team like the Titans are going to try to go all the way up to number 4 to get Will Levis or Anthony Richardson? Are they going to give you a first round pick and you're going to have 2 first round picks now in 2024? I don't really see a scenario that plays that way where you're going to get a massive return for the 4th overall pick. You're not going to get anything near what the Bears got, that's for sure. So you could trade down, get something, and then pick a player at 13. But I don't see the point in that if you're just going to get an extra 3rd round pick in 2024. Is it even worth trading down that spot instead of just getting impact player at pick 4? But I think it's also interesting waiting for after the draft. I don't know if the Ravens would be okay with being patient. Now, I get the market is only, you can only accept what you get. But I'm sure if the Ravens are making a deal with the Colts, they want that number 4 overall pick. And I think they maybe be more inclined to matching a offer sheet the Colts write if we're talking about after the 2023 draft and you're not going to get access to that 4th overall pick.
Yeah, I think if the Ravens feel like you've kind of done them dirty or you're trying to play games with them, they're probably just going to sign the sheet. It's one of the reasons this is so complicated. You've got so many moving pieces here. I just don't think you can go into the draft without knowing whether you've got Lamar or not. To me, the only scenario where you make an offer after the draft is if you go through the draft and the things that you want to have happen don't happen. You don't like your options at 4. You can't get Hendon Hooker later, and you walk out of there with no quarterback when the plan was to get one. Then I think you can go and if he's still on the market, try to make the offer sheet and try to make it happen. But I think I've seen a lot of scenarios similar to this where people are either trying to say, trade down and do this now, or, whatever way, use the number 4 pick on somebody else and then try to do it. But I think the problem you have there is you're banking on something you don't know will happen. And so if you put all your eggs in the Lamar basket and then the Ravens take all those eggs away, then what do you do? And I think as we talked about at the opening of the show, I don't think Chris Ballard survives a scenario like that. If he goes to Jim Irsay and he says, my plan is to get Lamar Jackson after the draft, and they don't land him, and you end up, in the top 5 of next year's draft, I think it's another GM making that pick.
You could be SOL, absolutely, because that plan could backfire. Like I said, the Ravens could feel like you're trying to pull an over on them. Again, they don't have to trade Lamar Jackson. They could easily match a deal and trade him next year. And Lamar, he cannot sit out because all he's doing is just really hurting himself, because all that happens if you sit out this year, kind of what Le'Veon Bell did, the Ravens still owe you, like the rights for you don't go away. It's like he's one step closer to free agency. Just the franchise tag he's on now gets pushed to next year. So there's no incentive for Lamar to sit out this year. And again, the Ravens, if they can match any offer they want and sign and trade Lamar Jackson, we believe later this offseason, they could trade him next year as well. So it's not like this is do or die for the Ravens where they're back to a quarter where basically they have to, basically Lamar Jackson take the first offer that's there. They still have a lot of flexibility and, like I said, a lot of leverage where they can match any deal they want and then still trade Lamar Jackson for a better price than what maybe the Colts could offer them with a 2024 and 2025 first round pick that we presume, fingers crossed, will be a lot higher than the number 4 a lot worse off, I should say, than the number 4 of a pick that the Colts have right now in 2023. You got to cross the fingers, George. You got to knock on wood because you never know with this team. That is for sure.
That's just so close to, the fingers crossed is so close to
fight on.
To the fight on that
it's really just
they're right there.
Destiny for hopefully Caleb Williams in 2024. That's the case.
I just see Caleb Williams in everything. That's what this comes down to.
And then that's a win. Patrick Holmes 2.0. Don't got to tell me twice, George. I am in. I'm in for another year of pain if it leads to number 13 in that red and yellow. I think it's red and yellow. I forgot the exact USC, technical colors.
Well, garnet and gold, I think.
Garnet and gold. I think you're right. Thank you. I was going to say cardinal, but it's not cardinal because that's Stanford's shade of red. Thank you. Garnet and gold. That is what fingers crossed the Colts will be selecting this time next year. But before we get there, one last case, George, against Lamar Jackson. This comes from Rest in Peace, Sweet Chloe. We are sorry for your loss there. They say, time to get off this vet circle and mold our own. George, your final retort to that case against trading for Lamar Jackson.
I would say a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. I kind of talked about this earlier. I don't think that the vet circle, the vet carousel really applies here. I think it's a different situation than anything we've seen before. I think, as you mentioned in your arguments, Carson Wentz is probably the biggest red flag here, just because you saw what the Colts went through there. The idea then was that maybe you were going to have a guy come in for 10 years, but he was 29 and was playing poorly when he got here. I mean, he was coming off arguably the worst year of his career at that point. So it wasn't as big a shock, as it would be if Lamar Jackson came in here and played poorly. There are questions about injuries, to be certain. That's what's definitely opening the door in here. But I think you have arguably the best sports medicine guy in the league in Rusty Jones. It goes all the way back to the 1990s Bills. And I think I would place my faith in him to change the diet, to change whatever maybe needs to be changed, and give Lamar the best chance to stay on the field. And I would put my faith in Shane Steichen to build an offense around him that not just takes advantage of all of his extensive skill set, but also is aimed at keeping him on the field. I mean, Shane knows, they had to deal with injuries with Jalen Hurts at the end of the year, where they had to kind of sit him out some of the last regular season games that obviously didn't matter for them. I think he would have played if he had to. But I think Shane is well aware of what the toll is on quarterbacks who are more physical. So I just don't think, to me, and I'm going back to sort of my opening statement. To me, it's less about the veteran carousel, and it's more about letting other teams pick your quarterback for you, as we feel like they have done the last few years. I think Ryan agrees with me on this, that the last few years they've let the league choose their quarterback for them, by letting everybody else kind of go in and they're the last team standing, in the musical chairs. And that, to me, is what needs to end. And I argue in this case, going to the draft is business as usual, because you've already set yourself in a situation there where the league's going to pick your quarterback for you. Going and get Lamar is a chance to pick your own quarterback, which they've not done. I think Lamar is getting off the carousel. I'm not sure the rookie is. And I close my case.
Okay, so there's a closing statement from George Bremer. Slams the desk. He is done. My closing argument is just this. A lot of money, a lot of draft capital for a guy that's missed 11 games in the past 2 years, most important games of the Ravens season each of the last 2 years. That, to me, is concerning. Playoff struggles are an absolute concern as well. He's not looked good in the postseason. In a loaded AFC where you're going to be competing against the Bills, the Chiefs, the Jaguars now, the Chargers, maybe the Broncos, Russell Wilson, get some life again. The Bengals, it's going to be a deep, loaded AFC. And I just don't think right now the Colts are true Super Bowl contenders with Lamar Jackson. And again, even though he's 26, it's win right now. Your ability to build a roster is going to be hurt for the next 2 years without first-round pick, and again, with a massive salary on your books. So I just think everything added up, this is not the right timing for the Colts to make this move in terms of chasing the franchise guy. I would just prefer at this point flexibility going forward. Ability to pivot, get a guy that you feel better about, that has less injury history, maybe get the first pick in the draft next year, which is preferably, that's my number one, at this point, number one target for getting the franchise guy and getting Caleb Williams fight on. So that is my closing argument. Court adjourned. Or is it court? I forget what they say. I forget what they say in the TV shows, but
we need a bailiff.
Yeah, we do need a bailiff. You're right about that. That would have made it so tough.
But hey, can't have everything in this world, right?
That's right. We'll leave the bailiff to Judge Judy. She can have that, and we'll just be ourselves here in this courtroom. So I think that should do it for this edition of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Let us know what you think. George made his compelling case. I hopefully made a compelling case as well. Which side are you on here, for Lamar or against a Lamar Jackson trade? Let us know on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Comment there where the live show, or not the live show, the video of the show is going to be. Make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcasts. The Blue Horseshoe Pod with the bright blue logo. Comment there as well on your thoughts about the arguments. And also, too, get us on Twitter at Ryan_Hickey, number 3, at GM Bremers, where you can find George as well. Give us your thoughts here. We appreciate all those who did contribute, gave your case as to why the Colts should or should not do it. It was a lot of fun, George. Like I said, it was nice to be in a courtroom for the first time. Hopefully I never have to be there again.
I was only in there once, but it was for an adoption, so it was a good day.
Okay.
And I have good memories of courtrooms. So, but yeah, hopefully never in there for any real reason. And I'll tell you what, I think you laid out a really good case here, and I think that is indicative. I hope if the listeners take anything away from this, other than that we both really like Caleb Williams, I hope that what they're able to gather is that there is no real cut and dried uh answer here. I think it is as complicated a situation as I have seen in the NFL. And so I think this was a fun show, and I think it's something that this argument's probably going on in a lot of rooms, all across Colts Nation. And I could just so you know, my wife's on your side. She is
Wow.
not swayed. She is very much on the don't make this move bandwagon.
Okay, so another there's not a lot of us there, so plenty of room to spread out, kick your feet up. There's a lot of chairs there, a lot of room for the against a Lamar Jackson trade for the Colts, that is for sure. But we appreciate you visiting us here, being a part of the jury in our Blue Horseshoe courtroom here. Maybe we'll be back at some point, to discuss some verdicts and argue some other cases. Who the hell knows, George? A lot of time to go here. But we appreciate you tuning into the Blue Horseshoe Pod. We'll be back later next week with some more thoughts on draft quarterbacks. We'll see if a trade is even done by this point next week. I doubt it, but you never know with the Colts and the ability just to fly by night, it feels like sometimes. So have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.